Awesome. So despite the fact that there is, as I've said, very little difference between product management in cybersecurity compared to product management in other industries, the reality is that the differences still do exist. And so why is that? Well, the number one reason is that cybersecurity products are indeed somewhat unique in that, first of all, there is a low install base. So very few cybersecurity products get a large traction, right? There are probably the top 10, top 20 vendors that you can all name, or you can name some, that do get the economies of scale and do get a large number of users. However, the vast majority of the cybersecurity companies are startups that don't really get to it. In cybersecurity, we are selling to expert users, meaning we are selling to users who understand about the domain expertise the product is addressing much better than the people who build that product to begin with. So every security practitioner has a much stronger opinion about the topic than the founder building the product in that area. And lastly, there is the short release cycles problem. So sadly, even though we do live in this cloud-first, cloud-native world, the reality is that the vast majority of large enterprises, meaning the vast majority of the big customers of cybersecurity solutions, don't really operate that way, right? They're not necessarily SaaS first. They're most certainly not SaaS only. And so anybody building a cybersecurity product has to think about all of that complexity and all the legacy that people in many other industries don't have to think about. The way I think about it, there are at least 4 challenges of building cybersecurity products. And what I would like to talk about today is what those challenges are and what are some of the ways in which they can be overcome. The challenge number 1 is the challenge of customer discovery. You see, when I worked in the financial technology space, I remember I was building products for mortgage brokers. And I remember the time when I would get on a call with a mortgage broker and I would ask them everything I could about the problem space. And they would be so happy to answer all of those questions because they knew one thing. If my job is to build a solution to their problems, they better tell me what those problems are so that I can build a solution and they can buy it and, well, have the product solve their problems. Well, it doesn't work the same way in cybersecurity. Because in cybersecurity, every single security practitioner is being paid to do precisely one thing. Well, maybe 2 things. 1 is to safeguard, secure their company, and 2 is to never tell anybody what the remaining gaps are. And so here I am as a product manager coming to a security practitioner and saying, hey, tell me, where are you insecure? Tell me what are the gaps in your security posture. It's very hard to do customer discovery when there is no pre-existing trust relationship. On top of that, there is obviously the fact that cybersecurity teams are overloaded. They don't have the time to do their jobs, let alone to go and talk to some founders or some product people who are looking to build something. And obviously, there is just way too much outreach. Like every second security startup is trying to ping the same security leaders, mostly security leaders, not even security practitioners, and asking the same questions, like what are your problems, what's top of mind, like where are the gaps, what are the areas of the budget. And being 1 out of 1,000 people who does that outreach is really hard. The second thing is that using the traditional product management frameworks kind of doesn't work. So you see, if you go out and if you take some product management course, a lot of the knowledge base that has been accumulated around product comes from the fast growth B2C companies that originated primarily in the Bay Area, right? So when you think about product managers and where they come from, the best practices in product and where they come from, we're typically looking at Facebook or Meta, we are looking at Google, we are looking at Pinterest, we are looking at Instagram. Like cybersecurity is nothing like that. Cybersecurity is a B2B sale where the buyer has a very strong opinion about the product they're evaluating. It's the kind of thing where you can't really, you cannot growth hack your way out. You cannot A/B test your way out. You have to understand the problem. You have to understand what you're building. And so, obviously, there are ways to go around this problem. The number 1 thing that I often talk about is really understanding the ideal customer profile and who at the company is the right person who actually cares about this problem. To what degree do they care about it? Do they have a budget for solving it? Do they not have a budget for solving it? But you see, the problem many product people and the problem many cybersecurity founders and aspiring cybersecurity founders make is to saying, oh, I'm going to sell to enterprises. But what does that really mean? Like, what kind of enterprises? Like, a large company that has, I don't know, 10,000 people will have very different concerns than the company that has 20,000 people, especially if that latter company has offices in several different states or maybe several different countries. A large enterprise in a financial industry is going to have very different concerns than a large SaaS vendor. Like Dropbox is very different than JP Morgan. But many people oversimplify their customer profile by just saying, oh, it's just going to be an enterprise. Depending on what kind of tools that enterprise uses, depending on what kind of products remain in their environment, despite the fact that it has been like many years since most of the other industry players have deprecated or have started using them. All of those factors, they make somebody, like they define somebody as a potential buyer. And all the companies have their own pain points. I know it sounds obvious, but too often we simply take shortcuts assuming that, oh, like this is a large enterprise, like I know exactly what the pain points they're having. And the other thing that is important in the context of product management and dealing with the more traditional frameworks is finding a way to show the value the product offers. And that is also something that cybersecurity products often struggle with, because testing efficacy is incredibly hard. Telling how vendor A is better or different than vendor B when it comes to the coverage is incredibly hard. It's impossible. And so then what starts to matter to customers are things like time to value. Like, how long does it take for me to start getting value from this product? Like, how long does it take for me to do a POC? How long does it take for me to understand, will this product solve my problem? Like, all of those factors become incredibly important, much more so than in many other industries where you can actually test the core value proposition of that product. In security, what buyers often end up looking at is essentially the other factors beyond the security coverage, because testing that coverage is incredibly hard. Every company does security in their own way. Every organization's environment is different, and therefore the way they do security, the way they buy, the way they procure tools, the kind of tools they procure is also incredibly different. We often like to talk about security best practices, and the reality is that best practices aside, there is a lot of customization. And if you're interested in building a product, let's just say you're a security practitioner, you go to market and you talk to 10 security leaders, every single one of them will have a different opinion about the problem you're solving. Like, every single one of them will have a different take on what constitutes the right solution to the problem. And finding a way to navigate it is hard, but is important. And again, it sounds obvious, but companies that look similar from the outside will have very different security challenges. In fact, what I've observed is that depending on the type of security leader you're talking to and their background, they will also see what constitutes security very differently. Somebody who comes from the law enforcement background will understand security very differently than somebody who comes from the compliance background, who in turn will see it very differently than somebody who comes from security engineering background. So even and obviously the type of decisions they would be making when evaluating products will also be very different. The one pattern that I often see with cybersecurity products is that founders build their products in a very opinionated way. And that introduces a challenge where the vast majority of the buyers will have a different perspective on how to solve a specific problem. And that's why the products that typically win are the products that are built in a way that is highly configurable and highly customizable, but that are sold in a way that's very opinionated. Meaning you're building a generic, generalized platform, but you're implementing it in a certain way that does not require the customer to have like a high degree of imagination. It is still a product that they can then customize. And lastly, many founders and many product people oversimplify the buying journey. I can't tell you how often I see this. Some founders just say, oh, all we need to do is just convince a CISO and we get the product adopted. And the reality is that it's a bit more complicated. If no security leader in 2024 is going to adopt the tool that their team is going to sabotage, because they know that that tool is not going to be successful. So at the same time, many security practitioners have this incredibly optimistic idea that, oh, we can just build a product and it's going to sell itself. We can go bottoms up. We can convince a security engineer to buy this thing. And as soon as we do, they will start championing the tool internally. But that also doesn't really happen. Partly because, and it is sad for me to admit, but I think as an industry, we have not yet reached the same level of empowerment that we have with individual contributors that people in, for example, software engineering have done. Security leaders still see and it kind of makes sense because security leaders are being held personally accountable for the outcomes. So if you're being held accountable for the outcome of running the security program, would you really trust your team member to make a decision that can potentially cost you your job? Probably not. And so there is this really problem around incentive system design and problem around the way people are being evaluated today that is impacting the way products are being built. So bottoms up is probably not going to work. There is, a variety of reasons, like as I've said, the fact that individual contributors are not equally empowered, but also importantly that the fact that most organizations don't really have budgets that they can give to security practitioners, right? Security practitioner has no ability to deploy a tool in the company environment unless the tool goes through the whole procurement process. So it's really hard to make it work. And it's not how the security products are purchased. So in order to make sense of this complexity and in order to navigate that complexity, the number one thing is to understand who the buyer is. What drives their decisions? Is it compliance? Do they actually want to get secure? Is there somebody else in the company that may impede the implementation of the product? Because what oftentimes happens, a CISO is incredibly happy. A CISO says, oh my God, I really want this tool, without realizing that they have no way they can ever get that tool adopted. They would like it to be the case, but they just don't have the pool. They just don't have, and they have to pick their battles. And sometimes this thing that the tool is offering is just not the battle they're willing to pick. So wherever you're looking to do, start with customer discovery. Problem, customer, market, and opportunity. Quite often security practitioners think, oh, I've experienced this problem myself. I know what I'm doing. No, you don't. And if you still think you know, no, you don't. You may have a company or a number of companies where you've worked at solve this problem. But the market is much bigger. Or it may not be much bigger. Maybe there is indeed 25 companies on the planet that run into this problem, and you just happen to work in 3 of those. It happens especially often with people who work in the Bay Area, because they quite often start building products that address the needs of a very small segment of customers. They're exciting customers. They're the kind of customers, the logos of which we would all like to see on our sites, but it's just a much smaller market. Understand the market size. Understand the urgency. Is this, yes, it is a problem, but is this the number one problem that's on somebody's mind or not? Don't skip the problem discovery. Even if you're a CISO, even if you're a security practitioner, and also importantly, don't just talk to buyers. Talk to the people who are going to be using that product. Too many people in the industry start their discovery with talking to CISOs and end it there. And when they do it, they may understand what will make somebody say yes to doing a POC, but they will not understand what will make the practitioner who is going to be evaluating that tool say yes to the tool during that POC. There are two fantastic books. The Mom Test is probably the #1 book I recommend to anybody who is looking to either start doing some customer interviews or just doing customer discovery, understanding if something is a problem. The book teaches people how to ask questions in a way that don't just get others confirm your biases, but answer the questions that you need to understand. And the other one, Continuous Discovery Habits, is again about continuous customer discovery. Recommended. This is just a wall of text. Really, the main message here is challenge your assumptions. Just because something is a problem, it doesn't mean that somebody is interested in solving it. Just because somebody is interested in solving it doesn't mean they're going to pay for that solution. Just because they're going to pay for that solution doesn't mean it's a product, maybe it's a service. Just because they're willing to buy a product doesn't mean that it's a venture scale business. Maybe the best you can do is to bootstrap something small. And like Grace has done a fantastic talk about bootstrapping. Talk to her if you want to get more insights. So again, challenge your assumptions, because at the end of the day, even like in 2024, the vast majority of security leaders and the vast majority of security teams don't really want to adopt any tools. But it also doesn't mean that the opportunity has ended. Because like quite often, I look at the market and I see the market just so incredibly busy, and everybody will complain, oh, there is this number of tools. And I don't know if I'm being recorded, if I can actually like call out specific vendors, but the point being, when I ask myself a question, okay, is a certain market saturated? The answer is always yes. But then I ask myself a second question, what are the chances that 10 years ago, we're buying tools from the vendors that are now the top 5 vendors by the market cap? And the answer to that, in my view, is 0. That cannot be the extent of security innovation. So there is still an opportunity to innovate, but it has become much harder to get like smaller solutions adopted. And just because some security leader is willing to buy a small point solution doesn't mean that they will not rip it out 6 months later when Palo Alto introduces the same feature. That is just good enough. Obviously, you have to scope out an MVP. And by the way, like I know this is sort of a speed run. Like I'm trying my best, but I am always happy to chat about any of the product management stuff in cybersecurity afterwards. When we're talking about scoping out the MVP, there are two main pieces that I want to mention. One, think about trust and transparency. Like, sadly, or one way or another, trust is the #1 factor that impacts the ability, or like impacts the probability that a security leader will even get to trying a certain tool. There are different ways to get out of this trust issue. One is to try and maybe build something in open source. The other one is to find a way to maybe build it in, so that somebody can deploy it on premises in their own environment, under their own control. But that trust factor matters a lot. And the second one is, don't ever try to build something unless you have design partners. Like seriously, if you cannot convince a single company on the market, even if it's friends or family, to deploy this thing and help you build it, you probably shouldn't be doing it. Not for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's not a big enough problem, and that's why nobody cares. Maybe they don't believe you can solve it, in which case, well, you have to learn how to sell yourself, and you better do it before you start building it, because that's the skill you will eventually have to develop. But find design partners, like find some beta customers. Don't build for a year before you get it out and before you talk to people. In fact, try to sell it before you build it. Like, understand if people actually care about it. Trust is important. And there are many layers of trust. Right? Do any of my peers trust about it? Like, that's why we often see the same, like we see customer testimonials on people's sites, because people care about trust. We see like SVCI, the Silicon Valley CISO Investments Group, and Anshu sitting here. Like having security leaders invest in your startup provides a tremendous boost to the reputation. Having security practitioners and security leaders as angel investors provides that boost. The second layer, does it work? Is it secure? Again, open source versions and looking for ways to get a free trial, get some kind of way out. It's not going to get you customers. Like, you're not going to be able to get through PLG that way, but you have to find a way to make people trust you. And sometimes showing them what's inside is a way to do it. And remember that trust has many different dimensions. Like, people trust from their countries. People trust my accent less than if this talk was delivered by somebody else's accent. That's just the reality of life. Find design partners. Like, once again, like, no matter how great your idea is, don't build it yourself. Like, every second day I meet security practitioners who have been building something for 6 months, for a year. And if they started, like, if they've done this earlier, they would have saved themselves probably like a year of wasted work. Like, find design partners. Like, this is probably the number one thing. And yeah, I don't really have the time to talk about land and expand, but I will just briefly say this. I don't know how many people have heard about this concept, but typically the idea is that we're going to find a small niche, we're going to expand, we're going to build in that niche, we're going to solve one problem really well, and then we're going to expand into other problems. Well, this is what it looks like from the startup's angle. This is what it looks like from the buyer's angle, right? A buyer has 60 tools, each of which are trying to land and expand. They're just doing this one thing, and then they're saying, oh, 6 months from now, I'm going to try and expand into other areas. And so you got this battle of vendors in every company's environment. And dealing with this is really hard. Again, not a life-changing insight, but remembering that this is what that actually looks like from the buyer's perspective, it changes, it has at least changed the way I perceive cybersecurity quite a bit. Yeah, good luck. If you have any questions, please reach out on LinkedIn. Product management is something I'm super passionate about. Cybersecurity is something I'm super passionate about. I wrote this book. If you haven't seen it around, check it out. If somebody wants a free copy, I don't have one on me, but if you trust me to leave your mailing address, I'll send you one. Thank you.